Hidden mysteries surround Sandy Island, a place marked on dozens of official maps, catalogued in respected atlases mentioned in government documents, but that simply doesn't exist. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But this is the true story of Sandy Island, one of the greatest cartographic mysteries of the modern era. For over a century, this phantom island appeared on maps of the South Pacific, between Australia and New Caledonia. Navigators reported having seen it. Cartographers drew it with precision. Governments disputed its sovereignty. There was just one small problem. When someone finally decided to actually visit it, there was absolutely nothing there, just open ocean. How can an entire island exist on paper but disappear in reality? The answer takes us on a fascinating journey through the history of navigation, monumental human errors, and the strange psychology behind the phantom islands that have haunted maps for centuries. Let's start at the beginning. On September 15, 1876, the whaling ship Velocity was sailing through the waters of the South Pacific under the command of Captain Frederick William Henry. It was a routine voyage until the crew spotted something unexpected on the horizon. Solid ground, an island that shouldn't be there according to their main maps, but which was unmistakable in the distance. Captain Henry meticulously recorded the coordinates in his logbook: 19 degrees and 15 minutes south, 159 degrees and 56 minutes east. He described the island as being about 24 kilometers long, covered in light sand that gleamed under the tropical sun. Because of this distinctive characteristic, he named it Sandy Island. But here's where the story gets interesting. Captain Henry wasn't the first to report this island. Decades earlier, in 1792, navigator Jean-Antoine Bruni d'Entrecasteaux had also mentioned a sandy island in that general region during his Pacific expedition. And after Henry, other captains also confirmed its existence in their voyage reports. With multiple independent sightings, Sandy Island quickly gained credibility. Cartographers had no reason to doubt. After all, experienced captains with years of navigation were all saying the same thing. And so, block by block, map by map, Sandy Island was being cemented into Earth's official geography. It appeared in the Times Atlas of the World, in Google Maps, Google Earth, and even in the French government's official maps of New Caledonia. For decades, no one questioned it, but there was a curious detail. No one had ever actually visited Sandy Island. No landing reports, no close photographs, no samples, nothing. Suspicion grew in the 1970s when satellites detected no land at its coordinates. But the maps insisted the island existed. Reports were filed and ignored. Tradition outweighed truth. Then came 2012. A team of Australian scientists aboard the Southern Surveyor sailed directly over the island's coordinates with high-precision sonar. What they found was undeniable. 1,400 meters of deep ocean, no island, no sandbank, nothing. The team crisscrossed the region in a detailed grid. The conclusion was absolute. Sandy Island had never existed. The discovery shocked the world. Within days, Google and National Geographic removed the island from their maps. Yet one question remained. How did an island that never existed fool the entire world for more than a century? The most popular theory points to a massive pumice raft. Imagine a huge, underwater volcanic eruption spewing out tons of lightweight, porous rock. This pumice floats, forming a gigantic, moving mass on the ocean's surface that can stretch for miles and drift for months, even years. From a distance, this sprawling raft of pale, floating rock could easily be mistaken for a sandy island. Especially in the 19th century when sailors relied on sight alone, it's plausible that the Velocity and other ships simply encountered one of these rafts. They marked its coordinates, but by the time the next ship passed through, the island had already drifted away or dispersed. Then there's the human element, the simple, compounding error. Once the Velocity's sighting was recorded and added to an official hydrographic chart, it became an authoritative source. Subsequent mapmakers, trusting the work of their predecessors, would just copy the island onto their own new maps. No one went back to the original source or questioned its validity. This is a common phenomenon in cartography known as a map trap or cartographic inertia. An error, once published, can persist for centuries, passed down from one map to another like an inherited myth. Each new map that included Sandy Island reinforced the belief in its existence. This leads us to the psychological side of the story. Once an idea is established, we tend to see what we expect to see. This is called confirmation bias. If a sailor's chart showed an island at a certain location, they might interpret a distant cloud, a reflection on the water, or even a pumice raft as confirmation of that island. They weren't lying, their brains were simply filling in the blanks based on the official information they had. The island was on the map, so it must be there. This groupthink mentality is powerful, especially in a community like 19th century maritime navigation, where trust and established knowledge were paramount for survival. But what about Google? How did this phantom island survive into the 21st century and end up on Google Maps? The answer is that even modern digital maps rely on vast amounts of historical data. Google's maps are built from countless sources, including old government charts, naval databases, and atlases. One of these sources, likely a digital version of an old nautical chart, contained the entry for Sandy Island. The data was automatically ingested, and the phantom island was reborn in the digital age. It wasn't until the Southern Surveyor's 2012 expedition provided definitive real-world proof that the error was finally corrected. The story of Sandy Island is more than just a quirky historical footnote. It's a powerful reminder of how easily misinformation can take root and spread, even in fields we consider to be based on hard fact, like geography. It shows how authority and tradition can sometimes override direct evidence. In an era of digital information, where facts can be copied and pasted in an instant, Sandy Island serves as a warning. It teaches us to be critical, to question our sources, and to remember that just because something is on a map or on the internet doesn't mean it's real. The world's oceans still hold many secrets, and our maps are constantly being updated. But the ghost of Sandy Island will forever linger as a testament to the fascinating intersection of human error, natural phenomena, and the enduring power of a good story. It's a phantom that haunted our maps for over 100 years, reminding us that the world is, and always has been, a little more mysterious than it appears. To understand how Sandy Island became real in our collective imagination, we need to dive into the fascinating and often imprecise world of historical cartography. Because, you see, Sandy Island wasn't alone. It was part of an entire category of fictitious places that historians call phantom islands. Think for a moment about the challenges faced by navigators in the 18th and 19th centuries. They were exploring vast oceans with technology that was primitive by today's standards. There was no GPS, no radio, no satellites. They relied on sextants, mechanical chronometers that were affected by temperature and humidity, and complex astronomical calculations done by hand, often in the middle of storms and rough seas. An error of just 1 degree in their measurements could throw a ship hundreds of kilometers off course. Unmapped ocean currents could push ships to different positions than calculated. Storms and strong winds created significant drift, and the clocks of the time, even the best marine chronometers, could gain or lose minutes over weeks at sea, making longitude calculations especially problematic. So what happened when a captain saw something on the horizon? Maybe it was a low cloud formation that looked like land, perhaps a patch of floating algae creating an optical illusion. It could have even been a phenomenon called a fata morgana, a complex mirage that can make the sky look like solid ground, and was especially common in tropical latitudes. In the specific case of Captain Henry and Sandy Island, modern researchers believe he probably spotted one of several things. It could have been a large floating pumice raft. Yes, you heard that right. When underwater volcanoes erupt, they can create enormous pumice rafts that float on the ocean surface, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers. From a distance, these formations can easily look like low, sandy islands. Another possibility is that he spotted a temporary sandbank or a newly formed volcanic island that was later eroded away by the waves. The South Pacific region is geologically active, and islands really do appear and disappear due to volcanic activity. In 2006, for example, a new island emerged near Tonga, existed for a few years, and was then partially eroded by the sea. But here's where the real problem starts. Once the island was recorded in Captain Henry's logbook, it began to take on a life of its own. When other captains sailed through that region, they consulted maps based on Henry's report. They expected to see an island. And human psychology is a curious thing. When we expect to see something, our brain tends to find it. This phenomenon is called confirmation bias. If you're sailing and see something distant on the horizon that might be land, and your map says there should be an island there, your brain automatically interprets that as confirmation. You don't question it. You don't sail closer to verify. After all, you have a route to follow and deadlines to meet. You simply note in your journal, "We spotted Sandy Island as expected," and continue your voyage. And so, each new sighting reinforced the previous one. Each captain who reported seeing the island added more credibility to its existence. Cartographers, working in offices thousands of kilometers away, received multiple independent reports all confirming the same island. How could they possibly doubt it? It's also important to understand the political and economic context of the time. The 18th and 19th centuries were periods of intense exploration and colonization. European nations competed fiercely for overseas territories. Discovering and claiming unmapped islands meant discovering potential economic value, ports, natural resources, or strategic military bases. There was a real incentive to report discoveries. A captain who discovered a new island could gain fame, recognition, and even financial rewards. His name would be immortalized on maps. So if there was any doubt about that distant mass on the horizon, why not report it as solid land? At worst, you were wrong. At best, you were a discoverer. Sandy Island was in good company in the pantheon of phantom islands. Consider Bamea Island, supposedly located in the Gulf of Mexico, which appeared on Spanish maps since the 16th century but was never found, or the island of St. Brendan, which supposedly existed in the Atlantic and was searched for by the Portuguese for centuries, or the Aurora Islands, an entire archipelago the Spanish swore existed south of the Falkland Islands. One of the most famous was Pepys Island, reported by English explorer William Pepys in 1684. It appeared on British maps for over 100 years, despite subsequent expeditions never finding it. It was officially removed from maps only in 1843, after British ships systematically swept the area and confirmed there was no land there at all. Even in the 20th century, phantom islands continued to appear. Maria Theresa Island, in the Pacific, was reported in 1843 and remained on some maps until the 1950s. Ernest Lagouve Island, also in the Pacific, was discovered in 1902 by a French ship and was only definitively discarded in the 1970s. But the story of Sandy Island has another fascinating element: the persistence of error in the digital age. How did a 19th century phantom island manage to survive until 2012, when we have satellites, GPS, and digital mapping? The answer lies in how cartographic data is shared and perpetuated. When companies like Google began creating digital maps, they didn't map the world from scratch. That would be impossible. Instead, they aggregated data from hundreds of existing sources: government maps, commercial atlases, geographic databases, and digitized historical maps. Sandy Island was present in so many of these respectable sources that the algorithms checking for data consistency did flag it as suspicious. If 3, 5, or 10 different sources all show the same island at the same coordinates, the program assumes the island is real. No human was manually reviewing every detail of every map. There were millions of data points to process. Ironically, the longer Sandy Island remained on maps, the more real it became. Its presence on Google Maps was cited as proof of its existence. Look, it's on Google, it must exist. People hypothetically planned to visit it. Travel blogs discussed how to get there. The Phantom Island had conquered not just paper maps, but the global digital imagination. The 2012 expedition that finally unmasked Sandy Island was a turning point. It wasn't just about removing a phantom island from our maps, but about highlighting how easily errors can persist, even in our high-tech era. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most intriguing question: what other Sandy Islands are still hidden in our maps? What other historical errors continue to be accepted as facts, simply because no one has bothered to verify them? The story of Sandy Island teaches us much more than just a cartographic curiosity. It is, in fact, a fascinating window into how we create knowledge, how we trust authorities, and how truth can be more slippery than we imagine. Think for a moment. For over a century, Sandy Island was as real as any other place on the map. People trusted in its existence. Naval planners considered it in their routes. Cartographers drew it carefully. In all practical senses, except the physical, it existed. This raises a deep philosophical question. What makes something real? If millions of people believe something exists, if it's documented in official sources, if it appears in respected atlases, doesn't that confer upon it a form of existence? Sandy Island existed in what philosophers call social reality, the realm of things that are real because we collectively agree they are. But let's bring this to more contemporary and practical contexts. The saga of Sandy Island resonates strongly in our era of fake news and disinformation. How many times is false information repeated so many times, by so many sources, that it begins to be accepted as truth? There's a concept in journalism and academic research called information laundering. It works like this. An original source publishes something inaccurate or completely false. A second source cites the first without verifying. A third cites the second. A fourth cites the third. Eventually you have dozens of sources all citing each other, creating the illusion of consensus, and multiple independent confirmations, when in reality they all trace back to a single dubious original source. This is exactly what happened with Sandy Island. Captain Henry was the original source. Everyone else either cited his report or confirmed the island based on their expectations created by his report, but no one really verified independently and rigorously until 2012. In the scientific community, the story of Sandy Island became an important case study about the need for healthy skepticism and continuous verification, even of established facts. There are numerous examples throughout the history of science where something was accepted as truth for years or decades, only to later be discovered as error. For example, for centuries it was believed that animals couldn't survive in the ocean depths due to extreme pressure. This truth was in textbooks, was taught in universities, until we began to actually explore the ocean floor and discovered entire ecosystems thriving there. Or consider the story of cosmic rays hitting Earth's surface. For decades, measurements showed that cosmic radiation decreased with altitude, suggesting it came from the ground. Only when physicist Victor Hess conducted more rigorous experiments in high-altitude balloons did we discover that the radiation actually came from space. So what are the practical lessons we can extract from Sandy Island for our everyday lives? First lesson, question even respectable sources. Google Maps is incredibly useful and generally reliable, but it's not infallible. The New York Times is a serious newspaper, but it makes mistakes. Your teachers are educated, but they don't know everything. Respect for authority shouldn't transform into blind credulity. Second lesson, multiple sources don't guarantee truth if they all derive from the same origin. When you're researching something important, whether for a medical decision, a financial investment, or simply to understand a current event, don't just count how many sources confirm information. Try to trace whether these sources are truly independent, or if they all drink from the same potentially flawed primary source. Third lesson, confirmation bias is powerfully deceptive. All of us, without exception, have the tendency to see what we expect to see and ignore evidence that contradicts our existing beliefs. The captains who saw Sandy Island saw it because they expected to see it. Similarly, it's easy to find information that confirms what we already believe and ignore that which challenges our worldview. Modern technology has made the creation and dissemination of information extraordinarily easy. This has wonderful aspects: democratized knowledge, global access to information, ability to verify facts instantly. But it also means that errors can spread faster and more widely than ever. A phantom island on paper maps took over 100 years to be debunked because verifying required mounting an expensive and time-consuming physical expedition. Today, false information can reach millions in hours. But, paradoxically, it can also be verified and corrected almost instantly, if we have the will and tools to do so. Interestingly, Sandy Island wasn't the last phantom island to be removed from maps. In 2013, shortly after the discovery about Sandy, cartographers began systematically reviewing other suspicious islands. Several small islands in the South Pacific were investigated, and some were confirmed as non-existent. But here's something even more fascinating. The inverse also happens. From time to time, real islands are discovered that were never mapped. In 2015, sailors discovered a small island near the coast of Canada that didn't appear on any official map. With billions of dollars invested in satellites and global mapping, there are still parts of the world, especially in remote oceans and polar regions, that are imperfectly catalogued. This brings us to a deeper reflection on the nature of human knowledge. We like to think we live in an era of scientific certainty, where almost everything has already been discovered, measured, and catalogued. The reality is more humble. Our knowledge, however vast it may be, is perpetually incomplete, and occasionally wrong. Medieval maps had dragons and monsters at the edges of the known world. Today we laugh at that naivety, but our own maps still have their imperfections, just of different types. They're not drawn dragons, but phantom islands, disputed borders, approximate ocean depths. And it's not just physical maps. Our maps of knowledge in practically all fields: medicine, history, economics, psychology are replete with their own Sandy Islands. Accepted facts will eventually discover are wrong, established theories that will be refuted, certainties that will prove more complex than we thought. The beauty of the Sandy Island story lies in its forced humility. It reminds us that we must maintain curiosity and healthy skepticism, even about things that everyone knows. It celebrates the value of direct verification and rigorous scientific exploration, and it shows us that even our errors can be instructive, if we're willing to acknowledge them and learn from them. Today, if you search the coordinates 1915's 159.56 on Google Maps, you'll find only deep blue ocean. Where once an island existed on dozens of maps, now there's an honest acknowledgement of emptiness, and there's something comforting in that, in humanity's capacity to correct its errors, even when they take 100 years to be discovered. Sandy Island may never have physically existed, but its story is very real. It's a story about human error, perpetuation of myths, the power of perceived authority, and finally, the triumph of rigorous scientific verification over accepted tradition. It's a story that reminds us to look beyond the maps we're given, to question even established certainties, and to value empirical truth over the convenience of convention. The next time you look at a map, whether paper or digital, remember Sandy Island. Remember that each point, each line, each name represents not an absolute truth, but a best human estimate of reality subject to revision, correction, and occasionally, complete removal. And perhaps, just perhaps, this makes us better navigators, not just of oceans and continents, but of the vast and sometimes deceptive landscape of information we all navigate daily. After all, the most important journey isn't to a distant island on a map, but to a deeper understanding of how we know what we think we know and how we can know better. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching.